Welcome to Denver Startup Week. I'm Ben Data, co-chair of DSW. This year marks the 10-year anniversary of Denver Startup Week. This community has been the catalyst for lots of change over the past decade, and this week we're coming together to celebrate the past and dream big for the future. We are able to bring Denver Startup Week to this community thanks to our 2021 sponsors. Thank you to our HQ and title sponsor, Amazon, and our title sponsors, whose leadership makes this week come to life. Capital One Cafe, Downtown Denver Partnership, Fluid Truck, Hotel Engine, and WeWork. And our track sponsors, who have made all of the great content you're hearing today possible. Founder Track, Kickstart, Growth Track, Friday Health Plans, Developer Track, Quizlet, Product Track, Palantir, Designer Track, Battery 621 in the Public Works, People Track, Exactly, and Spotlight event sponsor, Strat Labs. Our headline event sponsors are bringing the excitement this week. Thank you to B-Side Fun, Colorado Public Radio, Comcast, Coors Brewing Company, Denver Pavilions, Entrepreneurship at the University of Denver, Gusto, JP Morgan Chase, Method, Moss Adams, Pie Insurance, Promontory Mortgage Path, Red Bull Basement, Southwest, Tattered Cover, and VF Venture Foundry. Finally, thank you to our partner and member sponsors listed on the screen. Please say thank you to these companies as you enjoy our hybrid Denver Startup Week. And don't forget to use hashtag #DenStartupWeek to share your experience and moments of inspiration on social media. Have a great week.
Hello everyone, welcome to Denver Startup Week. I'm John, the Spotlight Track Chair and member of the Denver Startup Week Organizing Committee. Thank you for joining us for the 10th anniversary of Denver Startup Week. At Denver Startup Week, we strive to make all of our sessions a space where attendees can connect, learn, and grow regardless of age, gender identity, gender expression, race, ability, or sexual orientation. A special thank you to our sponsors for their support in helping us keep DSW free and accessible for all. Thank you for joining us and have a great week.
Good morning and welcome to our Allyship panel this morning. I am Zanetta Kelsey. I am the founder of Delightsome, a marketing and customer experience marketing agency here in Colorado, and I'm excited to join you. Thank you to Denver Startup Week for hosting us this morning and to all of you for joining us. We have a really exciting panel this morning to talk about an inclusive tech ecosystem here in Colorado. And I am joined by several esteemed colleagues within the ecosystem, and I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves in just a minute. But I wanted to remind you, the audience, of two things. If you have any questions for this panel, please use the Q&A feature within Zoom to ask those questions, and we'll get to those at the final 10 minutes of our time together this morning. And then also, if you happen to listen to a little nugget or a gem of information, if you would share that with social media using hashtag #DenStartupWeek, we would love that. So without any additional delay, I'd like to welcome Peter Adams. And would you introduce yourself, Peter?
Thanks, Zanetta. So I'm Peter Adams, and I'm the executive director at Rockies Venture Club. And this is a group of several hundred investors we invest in about 30 deals a year, and we've been doing this since the early 1980s. And I'm also the general partner of the Rockies Venture Fund, co-investing on these early stage angel deals.
Excellent. Thank you, Peter, for joining us. Michael, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. I'm Michael Beavers. I'm the Director of Innovation and Entrepreneurship for the City of Denver. I work specifically in the Office of Economic Development and Opportunity, and work closely with all the panelists here. So excited to be part of this conversation.
Excited to have you as well. Makisha Booth, welcome.
Hi, Zanetta. Thanks for having me. I'm Makisha Booth. I am the founder and head business coach at SisterBiz Global Network. We're an accelerator for Black women entrepreneurs based in Colorado with national reach. I'm excited to have this conversation and be here with the rest of you who I, as Michael said, work with you on a regular basis.
Thrilled to have you, Makisha. Thank you. Good morning, Alicia. Please introduce yourself.
Thanks, Annetta. Hi, everyone. I'm Alicia Herda. I'm the marketing director for the Blackstone Entrepreneurs Network based here in Colorado. Our primary goal is to serve second stage high growth companies. When we started, there was a lot of help for startups out there. So we're kind of that next phase of company, and we assist CEOs by leaning in, helping with their challenges and connecting them to resources.
Thank you. So glad you're here. And Angela, good morning.
Hi, Zanetta. Hi, everyone. My name is Angela Madura. I am the director of the Techstars Foundation. The Techstars Foundation was started about 6 years ago to add some of the resources that we have at Techstars to the startup ecosystem, specifically supporting underrepresented entrepreneurs. I'm happy to be here.
Thank you. And so this panel really is to discuss what this group probably knows as an existing problem here in Colorado, an existing opportunity, some would call it. We've talked about this week, Tammy Dorr talked about the incredible growth that Colorado has seen within its tech startup ecosystem. Already we're at 3.1 billion in investment from venture funds, and we've surpassed what the investment level was last year. Over 1,000 startups since Denver Startup Week started 10 years ago. And as best we can tell, and I started really digging into this about 6 months ago, we have about 3 to 4% participation in this tech startup ecosystem by BIPOC founders. And I just want to, for the audience out there, explain what BIPOC means. It's a term that is used for Black, Indigenous, people of color. And really what that means is that there is a collection of people of color here in the US and in Colorado that have systemically been underestimated, underinvested in, and lacked opportunity for involvement. And so what we're here to talk about is how we are working together and what we're doing to make this ecosystem in Colorado that is thriving more inclusive. So I'm going to ask each of you if you would share what your organizations are doing in particular to address diversity, equity, inclusion, and with people of color within these people of color within this ecosystem. So, Peter, I will start with you. You're on mute.
Somebody's got to do that first, right? Okay. Thanks. So we're doing a few things at Rockies Venture Club. So we do have a formal strategic plan with measurable actions to increase diversity within our community. But I'll just share with you that it's really hard. And in our business, there's two sides of this. One is actually investing in BIPOC companies, and the other is engaging BIPOC people as investors. And we've been struggling for quite a while building gender diversity. We have about 45% of our portfolio is women-led companies, but we've only been able to build about 17% of our investor base as women. So we look at those two key metrics for inclusiveness within our community. So within our BIPOC investments, we're about 18% of our portfolio. And for investors, it's maybe like 2%. So you can see where we've got some work. Ultimately, we want to increase that investment number, but we need to do it by increasing the number of investors.
Thank you for sharing that. Over to you, Michael.
Yeah, thanks. So a couple of things I'll chat about in our office. I commonly say that our office is the best kept secret, and that's not necessarily a good thing. And that's just simply because we're not super efficient at getting the word out about the resources there. But we do like to direct entrepreneurs and early stage companies to our office first, because we can be a great connector for you for resources. But a couple of the things that we do that, again, a lot of people aren't aware of is that we offer a small business lending program. And it's really serves as a gap financing program. So I say that it's typically geared towards companies that are starting out or growing, but not yet bankable. So we could potentially be a good source of funding for you. And that program specifically has a strong focus on supporting women and minority-led businesses in key areas of the city and county of Denver that have traditionally been underserved as far as investment dollars and business growth there. And another program that Alicia and I work on together is called Denver Scale Up Network. So this is a program that I refer to as a post-accelerator program, typically. So oftentimes we'll see companies that have been through some of the programming, like at Peters Rocky Venture Capital Group. And we have a real strong focus there to diversify the population of the businesses that are there. Last night, Alicia and I were fortunate enough to attend a great celebration because the program's been in existence for 5 years. And nearly 70% of the businesses that have been through that program are led by women. And 25% of them are led by persons of color. So we're getting better and we're still continuing to strive to do that. So those are some ways that we're doing it now on the business side.
And Michael, do you know offhand what that percentage was when it started 5 years ago for people of color?
It was significantly smaller. So the first 2 years that the cohort existed, there were only 6 companies invited into the program. And now for the last 3 years, we're kind of in that 15 to 18 companies per cohort range. The first cohort, I think there was 1 female founder in there. And in the second cohort, there were 2 female founders. And then the stats, as I kind of gave to you, are for the comprehensive group over the last 5 years.
Yeah, and I'm just going to drill in one more on this is take some intentionality to go from probably what it sounds like maybe 2-3% to 25% in 5 years. That is growth and change. What type of intentionality did you all have behind that program to see that number grow for people of color participation?
Yeah, it's a good question there, Zanetta. So that program that I referenced there, I interview about 100 CEOs every year throughout the course of the year for consideration into the program. First and foremost, kind of the criteria that we're looking at is the CEO coachable, right? Because that's one of the key aspects of the program. If you're a CEO and you think you know it all, then you're probably not going to benefit from the program. So coachability is first and foremost. Then we look at the diversity of the companies themselves, because we want the program to be industry agnostic, so to speak. So, I don't want it to be a post-tech accelerator kind of thing, although there are a lot of tech companies that are part of the program. And then thirdly, we look at the diversity of the founders themselves. And there is a great deal of intention there, and Alicia and her team and I both kind of sift through the CEOs that we've been talking with throughout the year and try to intentionally come up with a diverse mix of people in there from that perspective.
Excellent, thank you. And so Alicia, since Michael has teed you up, can you share more even about beyond Scale Up, what you all are doing at Blackstone to increase that diversity inclusion within your network?
Yeah, absolutely. Michael, thank you. I was going to explain the program and you've done it for us, so I appreciate it. But yeah, Bend, Colorado, we've had a longstanding focus, to inclusivity in the entrepreneurial ecosystem. We're a small but mighty female team, and our CEO, Kay, who's been our CEO for just over a year now, recently went through a strategic planning process. We got a recent round of funding from Blackstone out of New York, and the purpose of that second round of funding from them, because they were our catalyzing partner, was to focus on inclusion. And so through this strategic planning process, we really kind of dialed into how we're going to continue along this journey, because it is a journey that will go on forever. There's no box you can check that you've solved diversity and inclusion in your organization. It's absolutely something that we'll be working on for years to come. And so the program Michael just explained, Denver Scale Up Network program, is one way we do that. We have another program. We just finished our fourth round of CEOs. It's called Global Landing Pad, and a similar approach to what we do with the Denver Scale Up Network. But we bring the CEOs in and we connect them to the large network of advisors that we have. So for these programs, we put together, small sessions where CEOs can come in. So Global Landing Pad is really focused on international CEOs. And the cohort features CEOs from Australia, New Zealand. We've had Canada, Mexico, from all over, companies that are seeking to expand business in North America. So that's another program that we do. Kay, our CEO, is also a part of Colorado Inclusive Economy, which is a movement here in Colorado I'm sure you're familiar with, a statewide movement. They design intent and action CEOs and leaders. They have a brilliant toolkit. And so we definitely lean into these partnerships. And Zanetta, I would love, Kay was able to share with me a little bit about Div Inc. And what you guys do. And we're excited to what you guys can bring to Colorado.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, we're excited too. And I'll talk a little bit about that towards the end. So thank you for bringing that into the conversation. I do appreciate that. Yeah. And also shout out to Helen Hayes with Colorado Inclusive Economy. Thanks for that. Okay, so Angela, Techstars is one of the most renowned tech ecosystem builders in the world. Can you tell us a little bit about, from the Techstars Foundation perspective, which is what you're a part of and lead, what you all are doing to increase diversity, equity, and inclusion?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there are two separate efforts, the efforts of Techstars globally and then the efforts of the Techstars Foundation. Although they're often united and overlap, we have different strategies. So Techstars Foundation makes grants out to nonprofit entrepreneurial support organizations with a specific focus on diversity and inclusion. We've supported, last year we supported SistaBiz, but we've also supported organizations working with Indigenous youth in Australia, right? So we have a much wider view of how we support entrepreneurship, education, and training for people of all kinds of backgrounds, including women, people with disabilities, and people of color, especially in the US context. So we support those nonprofit organizations that we think are doing great work, and we try to extend both financial resources and the resources of the Techstars network.
Excellent. Thank you. And so, Makisha, your organization, your incredible organization, is reaching the fastest growing group of entrepreneurs in the country. And so by default, you're already sitting in that space. Anything to add from that perspective? And then part two is moving kind of on to the next question is, how difficult or how easy is it to work with majority programs as you focus in your particular lane?
How difficult or how easy is it to, say that one more time?
Work with majority programs, yeah, from your perspective.
Okay, yeah, I won't really address the first question because that's what we do every day when we wake up is. And but the second question is important to me because we're not able to do the work we're able to do in a silo. We have to have strategic partnerships. We have to work with government agencies. We have to work with mainstream organizations, or we can't do this work to close the gap. Our entire ecosystem has to be engaged. And so it's an important part of the work that we do to be advocates and to form strategic partners. We are funded by and supported by heavily by DIDO in the city of Denver. We are, as Angela said, Techstars is a huge supporter. The chamber of several chambers, the Women's Chamber, the Metro Chamber, a ton of different organizations, even RVC, I'm now joining their board. And so we are constantly out trying to form partnerships. I would say the challenges are capacity and capacity on both ends. Usually the organization I approach, especially if it's a government agency, is swamped. We're swamped. And we're trying to figure out how to get the most out of a partnership with limited capacity and time. The second thing is trust. So what does it look like to build trust between me and the stakeholders in that organization as a Black woman leading and trying to access resources and support for our folks? But then also when we try to bring those organizations together with our businesses, we have to think about how do we establish trust. I have to screen to make sure that it's a partner that has the value system that we have and that I want to put them in front of my audience, and my audience trusts me to do that. And so that's a process of relationship building and vetting, and then also just, looking at resources like in a good fit in terms of like, can we actually get some fruit out of this partnership? Just trying to actually do the planning and the hashing out of what can we do beyond funding, because that's obviously my foundation, but it's so much more than that. Michael Beavers has been amazing in the way that when you call and ask for something, he's going to get right on it. He's going to lead you to 3 or 4 different people. He's going to tell me to tell my entrepreneur, call me directly. He's going to help that entrepreneur right away. Like, it's those kind of partnerships that are super valuable.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Those are all nuggets. So I hope that people are using social media to share that out. So Makisha, you talked about trust, and this is a theme. So this is day 3 of Denver Startup Week. This theme around trust and inclusivity when we're dealing with this type of equity work has come up each day so far. And this is teeing it off this morning. And this is a theme I've been picking up on. And so I'm going to pass the mic over to Michael, since Makisha, you talked about him. And Michael, can you help us understand a little bit more about this trust theme that Makisha mentioned between an entrepreneur of color and any of the majority programs, whether it's from the government perspective or one of the private organizations? What is this issue around trust?
Yeah, and I'm really glad that Makisha brought that up. So I'll just kind of put it into context too a little bit. I just recently completed a digital equity plan for the city of Denver, and there'll be information from that report coming out here in the near future. But one of the big things that came up during the research and the discovery phase of that process was trust, right? It's a huge trust issue. And I'll just kind of boil it down to, I can put a laptop in everybody's hand who doesn't currently have one, right, to help with kind of this digital equity divide. But the reality of it is that if they're not trusting and they're not interested in using it, then it's ineffective, right? And that I see that happen a lot, especially in the business world, and with the lending as an example. It's like if it's not coming from somebody that looks like you, as an example, then maybe there's some hesitancy and some resistance there. And what we kind of learned through that digital equity process is that we need community members and supporters like Makisha's group, as an example, to be a voice and an advocate to help kind of bridge that gap in the trust space, right? And rightfully so, right? I mean, it's a systemic problem that's been around for a long time. People of color and people of diverse backgrounds and differences have been segregated and kind of pushed out from, you kind of use the term, mainstream or main population kind of led organizations. And we need to break down those barriers, right? And it's a long process. It's not just a flip the switch and come on, we're all here and welcoming, as much as we'd like to be that way. There has to be some success stories that come out of that, and the barriers need to be broken down. And as Makisha mentioned, it's a community effort to do so.
And what does it look like then, Michael, for if someone, so Makisha sung your praises, I can too, because you've been a great partner for me as I'm working to bring Diving to Colorado, making introductions. But what does it look like if someone like you is not in that role? If there's someone who is not as open or not as willing to share the network, what do you think what happens to the ecosystem? And, not trying to blow your ego up here,
No.
but you've done such a great job in what you're doing. What happens if someone like you who doesn't give that default trust to people in roles like Makisha and I, what happens there?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think we've seen what happens there, right? And that's kind of the history of how our country's been built, unfortunately, right? Is you have that segregation that happens, and you have that kind of tension that happens between diverse populations. And, I think you're realizing this, Zanetta, with coming here to Denver as an example, and Alicia and I sing this all the time, but the number one word that you'll hear throughout Colorado, particularly in Denver and Boulder and communities like that, is collaboration, right? And that's not just in the entrepreneurial world. It's just, society in general, I feel, just kind of working throughout all of that. And I think, if we don't have more people that are open to that, and I'm fortunate enough that I tend to gravitate and have circles of influence that share, the values that I possess as well, kind of as Makisha mentioned there, right? So that is my view of the world, so to speak, is that we're all here to try to solve these problems and overcome the system of injustice that has happened for decades in this country. So it feels like we're in a really good spot here in Colorado, and Denver and Boulder in particular, to break down some of those barriers and get more people like yourselves and Makisha, in leadership roles and being kind of the face of what entrepreneurship and just business in general should look like.
Yeah. So thank you. So you mentioned Boulder. So Angela, I'm going to go up to you with Techstars Foundation. And, we're talking about trust and collaboration. And I'm just curious, would like to hear from you. How do you engage in that space with Techstars Foundation? How do you create that trust between yourself and these organizations? And what are some of your goals going forward?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think one of the first things that we did to really think about the issue of trust is we had in past years, we had a very complex grant application program that required a ton of sort of proving the organization's validity. And we really did away with that last year. We just thought we needed to be faster, more responsive, more democratized, and really offer trust to the organizations that we're providing funding to, and say, hey, we believe in you. This may work, it may not. Similar to the Techstars entrepreneurial mindset, not every program is going to be perfect from the outset. So we really started to offer funding to a small group of organizations. To be truthful, we don't have unlimited resources, but really offering that funding and being okay with the risk and being able to tolerate that some programs may or may not be perfect and may need to iterate. I also want to just talk a little bit about trust on the Techstars accelerator side. I'm not directly involved in those decision-making processes, but I do want to just mention that the idea of trust and whether or not a founder can come to Techstars as a person of color, as a woman, as a person with a disability, and have a positive and equitable experience in the accelerator program is something that there's a team of people really evaluating inside of Techstars right now. So looking at all of the barriers from the very first interaction point with Techstars and seeing what can be altered, what can be changed, and how accessibility and inclusion can be addressed. So I think for me, the concept of trust really has to do with action and less with conversation and talking. And so I think those actions are happening both on the foundation side and on the Techstars side, although they may not be publicly visible for a while.
Yeah. Thank you for that. So that's good to hear that Techstars is on both fronts, the accelerator side as well as on the foundation side, making a change, right? And like you said, moving from the conversation into action. That's really good to hear. And so as I think about, Alicia mentioned that this is a journey, and it really is a journey, right? It starts with a level of awareness and moving into a conversation, moving into strategizing over an action plan, and then taking those actions. So Peter, over to you. You talked about the percentage of investors of color that you all have at RVC. And so what stage would you say that you all are at in the journey of kind of DEI to address that number. I think you, again, I can't remember if you said 246%, but if you would share that number again and talk about where you are in that journey and what you're doing going forward around that investor side.
Yeah, that is a great question. So there were two numbers. One is in the portfolio. That's the investments we actually make. It was about 18% are BIPOC founders. But on the investor side, it's like 2%. So, that's obviously something that needs to change. And there's a couple of things that are important there. We just had our conference last month, and we had a fireside chat with myself and Gregory Campbell, who's with the Angel Capital Association, and he's a Black founder and a Black investor. And we sort of talked through how he's had so many circumstances where he shows up and he's the only Black guy in the whole room, big long table with 60 people, and it's him. And I think, there's tipping points here. And, when you can get to where in the investor room, there's, 10, 20, 30% people of color, now it looks like a place where you should be there. And we found the exact same thing with integrating women into the investor network. It needs to be something that's very intentional. We've built programs around it. We've built special training around it. But we don't want to make it separate. But we want to have on-ramps where people can learn this sort of complex language and process of venture capital, which is frankly not very obvious. The other thing that's really important, and this is something, I just had bells ringing last night at the BIPOC pitch event. And this is this concept of generational wealth. And, thanks to Danielle Schutz for asking each of the companies, are you going to, build this company to grow it and run it for your whole life, or are you building it to sell it? And this idea of generational wealth was misunderstood, I think, by a lot of those founders. And the more we can show people that wealth is created by building companies and selling them, and then taking that wealth and becoming investors, and creating trust for your heirs and all of those things, that's the way that we build this pipeline of investors. So there's a lot to do.
Yeah, thank you for that. And so would you say that your angel investors, your network, fully understands the experience that, and I think you said his name is Ryan, maybe, that the Black founder and investor faces as the lone wolf, right? The only person in the room who looks like him when he's in that room of 60 people? Do you think they can appreciate or even have a level of awareness to that? And I asked that question in particular because there is a well-known Black tech founder here in Colorado I was having a conversation with the other day, and he talked about showing up to Denver Startup Week the first day, and everybody having conversations because they've known each other, and him coming in and no one engaging him, and what that feels like already as you show up, but what it feels like then to not be included in conversations and to be overlooked. So I'm just wondering, do you feel like your investors, your network has a perspective of what that founder faces?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'll answer it on two levels. One is, sure, we talk about it all the time. And we talk about how this is, building this friendliness of a community and having mentors and all of that, and having, the statistically significant number of people who look like you in there is important. But with that being said, the way you asked that wasn't, do we get that? And it's important. It's, do we really understand what that feels like? And the probable answer there is maybe, or partially. And so that's a lived experience that I think, you can try to understand, but, and you can build programs around it, but you're not really there 100%.
Yeah. So Makisha, for you show up in these rooms all the time as the only woman sometimes, and certainly the only person of color here in Colorado. What is that experience like for you? And then how do you process that for the community of SistaBiz as they enter into these spaces?
That's a heavy question. Like, there's a lot to that. I don't have enough time to answer that one. But what I do want to say is, last night for the BIPOC pitch competition, something that came out that kind of addresses or speaks to what you're saying is, I was with Diane Miles after the BIPOC pitch competition, and I said it felt really good to see a set of BIPOC founders get feedback and questions from a set of BIPOC judges, because we get it. Because you don't know what it's like to sit up there and present and get, some of the questions are just so frustrating. Like when they don't get it, when they don't get your market, when they don't get your plight, when they don't understand your struggle, and they have no clue. And you've got 7 minutes like everybody else, but in your 7 minutes, you also got to break down the whole history of slavery and all injustices and how that's impacting your deck. And so when you had last night, when Diane made sure we had a team of BIPOC judges, that was everything to me. There were things that came out in those pitches that our Black women founders didn't have to say a word to me. First of all, I knew all of them. Second of all, I've been following all their businesses and their journeys. Third of all, I understood where they were coming from. I knew their challenges and I knew their vision. I could understand what they were trying to do. I could understand who they were trying to serve. I could understand that I could see the potential in a way that I feel my white counterparts can't. And so I'm not saying that you should not be prepared to pitch in front of white investors. You have to. What I'm saying is there need to be times and spaces where you don't have to explain yourself and somebody gets it. And the way to do that is an example, BIPOC judges on a panel, but also inclusivity in these spaces at Techstars and at RBC, and making sure there is a Makisha who gets it when someone steps up to the table, and when the founder leaves the room and there's a dialogue, somebody's got your back.
Yeah, that's good. That's really good. Thank you for sharing that. And sorry, I didn't want you to double click down too far on that because we have these discussions, and it's important for people to know that when we enter into these spaces and we are the only person, certainly women can feel that way, but when you're the only person of color, and people just don't get your story from a cultural perspective or your lived experience, it's just another barrier. And so we've talked about, Makisha, you mentioned judges, just something as an essay as simple as including being inclusive on a judging panel. Peter, you've talked about it from having more investors. Angela, you're talking about it by making sure that on the accelerator side at Techstars, that there's thought that goes into how people of color move into these spaces. Alicia and Michael, you've mentioned it too. So there are all of these pieces of the ecosystem that are ripe for continued change and evolution to be more inclusive. And it's wonderful to talk about it, right? We say conversations are good, but moving from the conversation to actually measuring this. Let me ask about measurable results. And Alicia, I'll start with you from the Blackstone perspective. What should we be measuring in the Colorado tech startup ecosystem to ensure that we set some targets, that we're very intentional about this? Michael talked about maybe 6% to 25%. You don't get there without intentionality, without, I'm sure all of us have some level of corporate background, KPIs are important. How do we set some targets? How do we agree to that? And how do we measure?
This is such a great question, Zanetta, and probably the one in this list of questions that I thought about the most. And the reason I say that is because this is what I do at Ben, is I measure, right? And I try and put lists together and implement things into Salesforce. I mean, I'm on the ground trying to measure this. And the stats that Michael was talking about in the beginning that the mayor was able to share at our event last night, part of those came from a survey, and part of those came from, an Excel document that I started putting together 5 years ago when we started this program to watch and track what's been happening over the years. And do we look at demographics? We do. But is that a measure of success? I don't think so. I think it's a way to get us started, and it's so important that we start measuring now so that we can watch the growth. And I don't think we'll ever reach this point, like I was saying in the beginning, where we'll be able to check a box and say that this is fixed, or we've solved, or we have inclusion now. I think that, we will be continuing on this growth, and measuring for years to come. And it's a conversation we have internally at Ben all the time. How do we measure this? And there's so many different groups, it's gender, it's BIPOC, it's LGBTQ, there's veteran programs. There's so many ways that we can measure, diversity in the ecosystem. And I think it's just getting started, which is so important. So that, as just like you said, our Den Sun program started with 6 companies, and we went from probably 2-3% to 25-30%, and to continue to watch that growth is crucial as we continue this journey.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, and thank you for your attention to it. Angela, what about you at Techstars?
Yeah, so Techstars, I think, has a really unique opportunity both to be measuring the founders, the CEOs, and whether or not they're receiving adequate funding. But we also have the ability, and I think I'm really excited about the potential of really figuring out who's making the investments on behalf of Techstars, which are our MDs. We're starting some new conversations around hiring and recruiting, and as Techstars expands, making sure that the people who are making the investment decisions are people of color and women and LGBTQ folks, so that they're really able to, as Makisha was saying, hold the lens of the lived experience of a founder. And so that's a really exciting potential. And I don't want to be glib about it, but I honestly think from the perspective of what we should be measuring, I think if we, in the US context, measure how many women of color are receiving investment, we will actually measure everything we need to measure, because everyone else is above women of color currently in terms of investment dollars. And if we focus on women of color, everyone else will be better off. I think that is something that we can use as a signifier of our general diversity funding programs. From the Techstars Foundation side, we're measuring our impact based on number of entrepreneurs supported, which is really an exponential number based on the number of nonprofit organizations that we're funding. So we really try, it's sort of a diluted impact that we're trying to collect without putting a huge data burden onto the nonprofit organizations. So it's a little bit trickier. I think the Techstars side, the data is really clear that we have made a lot of progress specifically on women, and we've made less progress on founders of color. One of the other things that is interesting at Techstars is we're a global company. And so diversity and inclusion in other countries is a totally different story and has to be measured. And those conversations are also happening as well.
Okay, thank you. Peter, over to you. What do you think are some ways that we should be measuring this in the Colorado tech ecosystem?
Yeah, this is a super important question. And I think I'll talk about 2 things. And one is pipeline. So, in the investing world, you have a pipeline that's coming into you. We see about 1,500 deals a year, sort of in the top of the funnel. And from there, we pitch about 75 and we invest in about 30. So that's what we do throughout the year. Now, a lot of people complain that they can't get diversity in their portfolios because the pipeline doesn't have founders of color, coming into it. And this is where, you said it several times, and I just want to, call it out that this is a great word, this intentionality, because if you just sit there and do your same old thing, and even if you're prioritizing founders of color, which we do, you're not going to do very well. You have to, be reaching out to communities and, building your community to look like the people you want to be pitching. I mean, I do not look very, BIPOC friendly, even though I am. And so having people, thank you, Makisha, for, agreeing to be on our board, and Denise Caleb, we are also adding another, a woman of color, and, making ourselves look like the people we want to come in on the pipeline in the first place. So then once you get the pipeline, then you can start prioritizing and investing and supporting, those people. The second thing I just wanted to say about measurement, because I think a lot about measurement, and I think a lot about difficult types of measurement, specifically about intangibles. So we talk about DEI, you can measure diversity at all stages of your process, but inclusion is more of a state of mind than it is, a demographic number. And so thinking about how the experience feels and how inclusiveness it feels is an important thing to figure out how to measure, because that's going to be ultimately super important for our success.
Yeah, thank you for that. And as you talk about measuring diversity and the inclusion piece, there's the equity piece. And one of the organizations that I'm involved with here in Colorado set out last year to ensure that there was equity in a particular thing that we were working on, but didn't set any measurable equity targets to say we should be seeing our number move from here to here. And to get to that, we're going to do these specific things that we'll revisit it once we get to the end of the year. And as a matter of fact, in the pandemic year, the amount of equity actually dropped for people of color in a significant way. And everyone was shocked. I'm the only person of color that was in that conversation in that room. And I'm the first person to point it out with all of the other targets and numbers in there. And so my, thought here is, if it's not measured, and this is coming from my corporate background, if it's not measured, how will it be intentionally addressed? And so, Michael, over to you, your thoughts on how to measure this well.
Yeah, I think there's kind of two things for me, and I like what everybody else has kind of contributed to the conversation. But for me, we have to first address the systemic issue, right? And we have to get more young people and young people of color believing that they can become entrepreneurs and that they can do whatever they want to do, right? So next week, as an example, I'm kicking off an entrepreneurship program for high school students. And almost every single one of those students is a person of color. So we're, that's just one little thing, right? It's a long road and it's a long process. But we need to teach our young people that they can be whatever they want to be, and that there's way more options than what have been presented to them at the school level, right? It's like, gee, you're not good at math, so probably you should go do some blue collar job, right? Well, there's certainly ways around that, and I think we can kind of convert that a little bit. Same with other diverse populations, right? I'm also kicking off a program next week for the LGBTQ community, right? Specifically for transgendered individuals. I teach a high entrepreneurship class for formerly incarcerated individuals, right? Because this is a way for people to take ownership of their destiny and their ability to be successful in life. And so that part, I think, needs to be addressed, holistically as a society. I think we need to find better channels to help people become what they truly can be capable of. The other thing, and I like all the metrics and things that were talked about from the other panelists here, but for me, the one thing that really probably truly needs to be measured is wealth creation. Right. And how do we get, and Peter mentioned this earlier, right? We build businesses so we can sell them and generate some wealth and then do something good with that money. Right. And we need more people like you and Makisha and others to say, what are we building that's going to create this wealth? Because I think that that's really, truly the metric that should be measured, right? We can talk about how much money got invested to these communities and how much, support and mentorship. And Peter mentioned this too, right? About that, but in the end, what's the purpose of all of that? It's to create wealth and equality across everybody. And I think that's really what we need to be measuring, right? In the entrepreneurial world, in the venture capital world, we talk about, unicorns, right? And how do we get more unicorns that were founded and funded and grown by Black entrepreneurs, as an example, right? And I think that that's a way that we really kind of level the playing field a little bit. And wouldn't it be great to then have that day where we don't have to say, well, oh, look, there's a Black person in the room, right? No, we get to say, hey, look, that's Makisha Booth.
Yeah.
Both up there, you guys, right? So that's kind of, for me, that's what I'm dreaming about and envisioning for a successful society there.
Well, thank you for that. And that was actually going to be my final question in terms of what are you all hopeful about for this inclusive, equitable Colorado tech ecosystem? So thank you for finalizing your words on that. And we're going to quickly go down the panel and get this feedback around what are we hopeful about, since we talked about what tactically can be done. And then we'll move to, it looks like we have one question in the Q&A feature. So we'll ask that question as well. So Makisha, what are you most hopeful about for the Colorado tech ecosystem in particular?
Well, I'm definitely excited about DivInc coming to Colorado and your leadership around DivInc. I'm excited about Black and Brown founders actually being able to explore rethinking technology in their businesses, because a lot of our businesses that aren't currently tech have the potential to have a tech component that, brings in revenue to their business that isn't right now. And so I'm looking forward to DivInc working with SistaBiz to see how we can work with our founders to explore technology and what it looks like for their businesses, and position them to receive more investments in their businesses as a result, and build capacity in their business as a result, using technology to build capacity to scale, to grow. But I will say this, I think that I don't share the same feelings as everybody else about unicorns. I talked about this with Seth Levine yesterday. I think that it's common for our world, white-led European worldviews to hyper focus on growth in such a way that some of the decisions that are made are often against what's good for the entire ecosystem. And the unicorn idea has hyper focus, I believe. And I believe if you look at the word unicorn, it has one in it. It's not about community. And I really want us to focus on the bees and the beavers in our ecosystem. The bees pollinate and give back and spread, and the beavers regulate the ecosystem. And there are other people and other players in the ecosystem besides the unicorn, and we need them. And the unicorn is going to take us down if we hyper focus on it, continue to do that at the expense of the entire ecosystem. They are less than 1% of the community. Why are we so focused on less than 1% of our community? So I'm looking forward to us rethinking what the place of the unicorn is in our ecosystem, and having small business be redefined, and entrepreneurship be redefined for more inclusivity in that way.
Excellent. And thank you for that. Shout out to DivInc. I'll get to that in just a moment. All right. So Peter, over to you. What are you hopeful for?
So many things, but I'll just talk about one that I think is important for, thinking about what you can do in terms of actions to make it happen. And one is sort of normalizing founders of color in tech, and making it so it's not the exception. And one way that we're embarking on with our plan this year is, as we begin new venture funds, and we've got 2 launching in 2022, to make sure that each of those funds has a general partner of color. And, I've talked about, within our angel investing group, incorporating more and more angel investors. But for the funds, it's the same principle. And, we do have a pipeline issue looking for general partners of color. There are not a lot of people who have been general partners of funds in the past. So we're developing sort of a general partner accelerator, developed what the processes are, how we evaluate deals, how we manage portfolios, the portfolio construction theory, all of those things, so that somebody can talk this language. It's kind of like learning Greek, really, to understand how venture capital works. And so, but the benefit of this is it puts the the focus on reaching out into communities with people who look like the people we're trying to build pipelines for, and then building that structurally. So it's not just a response to, Black Lives Matter and, things, happening recently, but it's something that is, each fund is 10 years long, so this is a long-term commitment.
Yeah, thank you. Angela, over to you.
Oh, goodness. So I think Techstars is taking on a number of initiatives that I think are very exciting and hopeful. We just started a partnership with JP Morgan Chase for female founders in Atlanta. And I'm hopeful that that class of 20 was just announced, and I'm hopeful that that leads to some new exciting things. I'm really excited about Div Inc. in Colorado. I get to see all of the community-based nonprofits doing the work that they are most capable and most skilled at doing, and supporting them. That gives me hope all the time. And hopefully I'll seed, through those nonprofit organizations, the pipeline that then gets invested in by Peter's organization, right? So I think really looking at the whole ecosystem and having collaboration around that brings me a lot of hope.
Excellent. Alicia, I'll let you have the last hopeful word here, and then I'll talk about Div Inc. just briefly and move to the question that we have in the chat.
Great. Thank you. First of all, going back to what Makisha said, I thought that was so brilliantly put. And the metaphor about the bees, I agree aggressively. My husband and I just talked a long time last night about some of these lower players, and to have the most healthy economy and ecosystem, you have to focus, on all of it, not just the one. So Makisha, just shout out again. That was so incredibly put.
She always drops nuggets.
And I love that somebody put in the chat that bees and beavers are actually real.
I just love that so much. I feel like we could talk 30 more minutes just about that alone. But, I think at Ben, we're really hopeful. Like, we've been able to pivot and change a lot over the last couple of years. And every time new conversations come up, or if it was COVID or these diversity and inclusion conversations, we've been able to pivot and change. And I think the ecosystem needs to do that, because just because something's been done, for a long time does not mean it should be done that way forever. And if it's the way that it's always done, that's why we do it. Horrible. That's not what we should do. So we've been able to, receive a lot of feedback from our network and take that feedback, good and bad, and change how we do things. And that needs to go across, all organizations and all ecosystems. What we've been doing is not working. So, you need to be open to changing how things are done on all levels. And so I'm hopeful that change is coming, and that, each organization will take it seriously, and we'll continue to do it at ours.
Excellent. So, Michael, I don't know if you're able to see the question in the chat by Angela Wilson. If you wouldn't mind taking a look at that and taking a stab at answering that, we have to begin to wrap up. So, Angela will try to answer your question in the Q&A feature, which is, since 1 in 4 people have a disability, how are people with disabilities part of the equity and inclusion conversation? And so we'll try to get to that. But I just want to first thank all of my incredible panelists for such a incredible conversation today. This was really important, especially for me, because of the work that I have pivoted towards, which is because I saw this gaping hole in our Colorado ecosystem. I wanted to, in my position with my background in tech and marketing, having worked at a startup, having worked with startups and with large global organizations, I wanted to be able to leverage my background to insert myself here in Colorado in a way that would be helpful. And so knowing, after doing some research, that we're at about 3 to 5%, as best we can tell, of founders of color here in the state of Colorado, we started looking at models to address that. And there is a nonprofit that's based in Colorado, in Austin, Texas, called Div Inc., short for Diversity and Inclusion, and started by Preston James, that has launched over 100 companies in tech in the past 3 years. And so we are working to bring that model here to Colorado. And it's an accelerator program that is very closely tied with Techstars. And thank you, Techstars Foundation, for your support and all of the support we've gotten from the panelists here to help launch an accelerator that is geared toward helping people of color pre-seed stage understand what is needed to run a company, to scale a company, to create network opportunities for them and funding opportunities. And so with that, I just want to thank everyone, our audience, for joining us. Be on the lookout for Div Inc. and all of the rest of the activities that the rest of our panelists have shared with you today. And have a wonderful day, everybody.
Yeah, and I just wanted to say, I'm going to put my contact information in the chat. So Angela, if you want to reach out to me, I'm happy to chat with you about how we can help.
Thank you, Michael. All right, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks all.